So you guys don't know this, and I'm about to reveal a very dirty secret to you. But I actually sit on a really thick, fluffy pillow that boosts me up a few inches for my videos. That's how much of a hobbit I am. Hi everyone, my name is Holly, and in today's video I am going to be doing my November wrap-up. So if you saw my November TBR, then you know that I had a plan, a set plan for November to read an entire trilogy, and well, my plans were spoiled. Heh. Plot twist. I ended up receiving my most anticipated read of 2019 by surprise, but we'll get to that later. So the very first book that I read in November was The Queen of Crows by Mike Cole, and this is the sequel to The Armored Saint, which I read in October, and it ended up being one of my favorites. I actually have a spoiler-free review up on my channel right now that you can go watch. I highly recommend watching it if you're interested at all in this series, because I go so much more in depth about that first book, and I'll link it down below for you or up in the cards. But the basic premise of the series is following Heloise, a 16-year-old village girl who ends up becoming a leader of an uprising against the Order, who basically wants to kill anything that resembles magic and even people who wield magic. And this book takes place directly after that one. Barely any time has passed, I would say like a day or two, and we are immediately confronted with danger as the villagers that we're following in the first book have to quickly make a decision on what to do next. While The Armored Saint completely focused on Heloise's bleak existence and struggles, a very depressing story, this sequel follows her becoming a very strong leader to a war, so to speak. Bravery is a huge message within this sequel, and we're getting a ton of action and battle tactics. It's heavily focused on military, but in a fun way, and that's saying a lot because I normally don't really like military fantasy, but this book just made it so interesting to read about, and you can tell that the author has a lot of experience with the military. I follow him on Twitter, so I know that for sure. This story is heart-wrenching. You will weep, you will get very angry, but I think by the end of the story you will find yourself cheering. I ended up giving this one 4.25 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read, and this is actually the trilogy that I was supposed to be focusing on, but hey, at least I read the first book, and that was Age of Assassins by R.J. Barker. This is a first-person adult fantasy series following a young disabled assassin with his master on a mission as they go into this huge castle that is full of backstabbing royals and different factions. The queen suspects a plot to murder her son, aka the prince, so she hires these two assassins, and their goal is to try and find this assassin and whoever hired the assassin. I hope I explained that well. Murders begin to happen, and it just ends up being like one big hodgepodge of a whodunit mystery. But there is a really interesting subplot that I was very fixated on while reading this book, and that is about these sorcerers in this world. They have completely destroyed the lands that are surrounding the kingdoms, and they are hunted down and mercilessly killed. Every now and then we would get a depiction of the landscape being just absolutely scorched, and I wanted answers to the subject so bad. Now Gurton, the main character that we're following, is a very sympathetic protagonist. He is a very obedient student, he is loyal, and he's very grateful for his master. Now with his master, who is named Merla, I had a lot of problems with her. She is supposed to be this amazing, famous assassin, the best assassin around, and there was nothing that led me to believe that. And also her dialogue came off really robotic. I expected more bite and more crunch to her personality. She was just very stiff and monotone, and she just seemed like a character placed in the story for Gurton to kind of move around with. I also very unfortunately predicted every single plot twist in this story, and there's a very unfortunate info dump right at the end that was just too extreme for me. Like, you shouldn't have to laboriously explain so many things at once. Overall, I just kind of found the plot to be very slow moving and a little bit plot holey for my taste. I did end up giving this one 3 stars out of 5, and I'm really hoping book 2 picks up. And the next book I read is the culprit to my very disorganized month, and that was The Hot King by Josiah Bancroft. This book doesn't come out until late January of next year, and Orbit surprised me with an arc, and You guys should have seen my face when I opened up that package. I totally thought it was something different, and it ended up being this, and there was even a little note inside saying surprise, and oh, I could have cried at that moment. This is the third book in the Books of Babel series, and I don't know why I keep calling it the Tower of Babel series. I always catch myself in my videos saying that, but it's not. It's Books of Babel. But I have a spoiler-free review for this up on my channel that you can check out. Yes, this is the third book, but yes, you can still go watch that video because it's spoiler-free. I feel like I organized my thoughts very carefully so you can still enjoy the video. But as you can tell, I immediately dropped everything to read this, and it's just over 600 pages, and I read it in like 3 days. That should be saying something because I'm a slow reader. So I was not disappointed in the slightest by this. By far a masterpiece, one of the best books that I have ever read. Josiah Bancroft moved the plot in a totally different way than the first two books, but yet it was everything that I wanted. I didn't know I wanted it until I started reading it, but I was left speechless. It is so rare for a book to leave me utterly incapable of thought, but this series just keeps getting better and better with each book, and it's a series that I cannot predict what's going to happen. Like, how's the author doing this to me? But I ended up giving this, and very easily, 10 out of 5 stars. Like, on point. Oh, I also have a spoiler-free review for the first book as well. Yes, I do regret not doing a spoiler-free review for the second book, but we're not going to talk about that. The next 3 books I'm going to be talking about I read on my Kindle, so I will be popping their covers up on the screen here. The first book is The Scent of Shadows by Ryan Glenn. This is a fantasy series that reads like a middle grade. Well, actually, I feel like it kind of reads maybe a little bit lower than a middle grade. So page 1 opens up with our main character, Anna, our protagonist, who is climbing a tower to eavesdrop on her father, who is talking to the captain of the guard about soldiers going missing, and also about the notorious King Roland, who is also king of the Wraiths, who are these really creepy shadowy creatures with glowing red eyes, and they are ravaging villages. We are then immediately thrown into another scene with a punch. It's literally Game of Thrones Red Wedding up in here. Yes, it's in the synopsis, and no, I will not tell you anything further because I don't think it should be in the synopsis. I hate it when books do that, but Anna herself is quite a feisty gumdrop. She doesn't want to wear any of the dresses that her mother wants her to look presentable in. Yo girl just wants to wear her leggings. This is literally me. She wants to be out in the forest and climbing trees, and her wish is unfortunately granted, but in a very disastrous fashion, and this leads her to have to try and survive out in the wild, where she meets a boy, where she travels to a location called a sanctuary, and this leads her to meet new people and have a thirst for her enemies. But it becomes very clear here how serious this war has become. Well, sort of. Actually, the plot becomes kind of monotonous at this point, and every time I think about this book, I start picking it apart and my rating becomes lower. This is a story where I was very excited at first to pick up my Kindle and dive right back in because I felt like I was on the tip of the iceberg. I was on the verge of a plot twist or something really exciting to happen, and then nothing happens. The book got very repetitive. Our characters are having to go through military training, so they would eat breakfast, go train, eat lunch, go train, eat dinner, go train, and then it would just repeat over and over again, and I got very exhausted. But there were so many cool elements that were added to the story, like Anna is wearing a necklace that glows and it shows her where the safe houses are so that you're protected from these wraiths. The wraiths have golden weapons that enhance their powers, and also there are magical barriers that are protecting the villages and kingdoms, which was really interesting. Another con I have is I didn't like how nonchalant the characters were. Anna went through a very traumatic experience, something that I definitely think would affect the character a lot more mentally, but she was just kind of skipping along with really no consequences to what happened to her. And she even meets King Roland and his entire army, and yet she cracks jokes and does not fear them whatsoever. Like, I don't think a little girl would react this way. All in all, this was a very fast read for me, but I keep finding more cons than pros, so I ended up giving this one a solid 2.5 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was a graphic novel, and that was Water Snakes by Tony Sandoval. So, are you looking for an incredibly dark and gothic lesbian graphic novel? Well, here you go. This is for sure one of the hardest reviews I have ever had to put together, because this graphic novel really tells the story with its gorgeous art. In fact, I'll put some pictures up for you, but the art was so beautiful and it was very gothic and macabre. It's so freaking creepy and I love it. So let me try to sum things up for you, because I do not want you to read the synopsis. Don't read the synopsis. It spoils the plot twist that literally made me gasp. So here we go. We are following a young girl named Mila who has a run-in one summer with a pretty girl named Agnes, and it becomes very clear to the reader that something isn't right. I'll be honest, I was confused as fork probably 60% through this graphic novel. But then we encountered that plot twist and all of the puzzle pieces started to come together, and do you know what I did? Immediately after I finished it, I reread it. With my newfound knowledge, I started to understand the stuff that was happening. Is this a cute love story? No, it is not. It is so dark and creepy, and it is verging on the edge of horror. Some panels are absolutely bone-chilling. Is there world building? No. Are there backstories for the characters? Not really. But as a whole, this graphic novel is on a whole new level in its own genre, and it's a standalone, unfortunately, but I am crossing my fingers that we're going to get more to the story. I ended up giving this one 4 out of 5 stars. I really loved it. And the final book that I read in November was The Enchanted Sonata by Heather Dixon Walwork. Oh, do I have a perfect Christmas read for you. This is a YA fantasy retelling of the Nutcracker. Now, let me tell you, I am not personally very interested in the Nutcracker story, which leads to my knowledge being very minimal, but that did not stop me from adoring this book. So we are following a girl named Clara, and her world is turned upside down when on Christmas Eve she finds a very mysterious present wrapped underneath her Christmas tree, and as she opens it she finds a very handsome Nutcracker and also a strange book along with it. So now as she opens up the book to read it, she immediately realizes that the story is more than meets the eye. The story is literally played out in front of her of another world inhabited by a young prince named Nikolai, who is on the verge of becoming emperor, but unfortunately one night tragedy strikes when an evil magician appears and he ends up turning all of the children and all of the kingdoms into toys. One thing leads to the next and she ends up being transported to this world physically. This book is literally the definition of magic. There's an evil magician, there's fairies, there's a talking Nutcracker, there's giant evil rats. I was absolutely enchanted by this world, but don't let that fool you into thinking that this book is just full of spun sugar. This book has some very dark scenes in it. There is some gory battle scenes and also some very heartbreaking ones as well. Also, the entire book is centered around music, and it's built upon this aspect that music is magic and it is needed to save the world. Clara herself is a pianist, and her father taught her when she was young, but he has unfortunately passed away. Also, another musical element to this is the evil magician. He carries sheet music around with him to conjure up very dark, sinister things. Speaking of the magician, what a fantastic character. He was dark and beautiful and mysterious, and he even has a complete chapter of his backstory, which made my love for him settle even more. He had so much misplaced passion and so much complexity to him. He kind of reminded me of the Darkling, actually, from the Grishaverse. I can honestly see myself reading this one every Christmas. It just has that perfect formality to be a seasonal read, and I will be sure buying a physical copy of this one. I ended up giving it a 4.5 out of 5 stars. Alrighty, so those were all the books that I read in November. Tell me down below at least one book that you read, because I would love to know. Give this video a big thumbs up for me. It helps me out so much. It truly does. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't. left because I upload every single week. Follow me on my social media. I am at Holly Hearts Books on Instagram and at Holly Niece on Twitter. And until we meet again, happy reading.